Welcome to Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible. Today we're looking at Genesis chapter 39. There are 23 verses in this chapter. So let's look at this chapter more closely. The first difference we notice is in verse 1. It says that Potiphar was the eunuch of Pharaoh. The eunuch. In the Masoretic, it says he's an officer of Pharaoh. Either way, he is someone of prominent position. He is an authority in Pharaoh's area of rulership under his domain. And a eunuch technically is also somebody who, if I remember correctly, doesn't have their genitals, but either way, he is a eunuch, but it says he's an officer. Verse 4 says that Joseph was well-pleasing to him, to Potiphar, versus the MT saying that he served him. But we know that, yes, he did serve him, but it's more that he was well-pleasing to him. He had favor in his eyes. That's why he did give him everything he had into his hand. He found grace in his presence and was well-pleasing to him. So it wasn't only one-sided where he had favor, but he also earned that favor. He worked for it. He did what was right in his sight, in the sight of his Lord. Potiphar. Verse 6 says Joseph was handsome in form. So he's attractive, but not only handsome in his form and the way his body looks, but he was exceedingly beautiful in his face. Okay, what does the Masoretic say? He was a goodly person. He was good and well-favored. Okay, that's redundant because it just says there in verse 4 that he found grace. He was well-favored. Why aren't they focusing on his external appearance? He was known to be beautiful and handsome. He's very attractive. We're going to look more into this after the next 3 verses. Verse 11 says, no one was in the house. No one of the household was inside the house. Versus none of the men of the house were in the house. But it makes more sense that no one was there. Why would you do something? Because this is essentially the wife of Joseph's master, tempting him to have sexual relations. Why would they do anything if there were women in the house? Although all men were gone, there would still be women servants, maid servants. The Septuagint gives us a more realistic context, a more realistic scenario that no one was there. Nobody, not a soul was there, not even a mouse. Verse 17 says, and said to me, I will lie with you. So this is the witness of the wife of the master of Joseph, saying, you brought him to me, he came to mock me. And Joseph said to me, I will lie with you. I'm going to sleep with you. I'm going to have sex with you. That's her eyewitness account. That's her testimony. The Masoretic says nothing. There's no he said, she said. Doesn't say that she said this about Joseph, although in the Septuagint it really lays it out. He said, I'm going to sleep with you. Let's do this. And that's why she lifted up her voice. Why would she lift up her voice if he wasn't trying to impose himself and force himself on her? Doesn't make sense, but the Septuagint does make sense. So it was omitted completely. Verse 23 is the last verse we're looking at for this chapter. It says that the chief keeper of the prison knew nothing, for all things were in the hand of Joseph. So he had no business with the affairs of the prison. He just gave it all to Joseph. He just trusted him. Whereas the Masoretic says he looked not to anything that was under his hand, Well, technically that's true because he gave it all to Joseph. So he didn't really know. He didn't dabble in the business of the prison when he handed over whatever he did under the authority of Joseph. So that's all I have to say about this chapter. We're going to look now at some extra biblical, extra non-canonized texts, specifically the Book of Jubilees, to see what it says regarding this account. So let's look at that right now. I'll just pause this for a moment. So I do apologize in advance that I'm going to take longer than normal, but I'm reading this as I'm going. It says here in Jubilees chapter 39, same thing that Septuagint is saying, that he was very beautiful in appearance. His master's wife lifted up her eyes and saw Joseph, and she loved him, and he wanted him to sleep with her, but he did not surrender his soul. This is verse 6. He did not surrender his soul, and he remembered Jehovah and the words which Jacob his father used to read from among the words of Abraham, that no man should commit fornication with a woman who has a husband, not just any woman, so a married woman, that for him the punishment of death has been ordained in the heavens before the Most High Elohim, and the sin will be recorded against him in the eternal books continually before Jehovah. And Joseph remembered these words and refused to lie with her. So that's the context. That gives you more information as to his MO, his rationale, why he did what he did. She besought him for a year. So this wasn't going on for just a day or a week or a month. This happened for a whole year, trying to entice him to sleep with her. But he refused and would not listen. But she embraced him and held him fast in the house in order to force him to lie with her, and closed the doors of the house and held him fast. But he left his garment in her hands and broke through the door and fled outside from her presence. And the woman saw that he would not lie with her, and she calumniated him in the presence of his Lord, saying, your Hebrew servant, whom you love, sought to force me so that he might lie with me. Okay, he broke the door. So they saw the garment of Joseph. They heard the words of his wife. They cast Joseph into the prison. And like it says, he had favor in the sight of the chief of the prison as well. And he committed all things into his hands. Okay, so that's all for the Book of Jubilees. We're going to move on to the Book of Jasher, see what it says here. Now, it says a lot. I've read this section over and over. Essentially, yes, she enticed him. It says her name is Zelika. This is chapter 44 of Jasher. So she looked at him. He was a youth, comely and well-favored. So notice he is only 17, actually 18 years old, it says in verse 14. 18 years old, of youth with beautiful eyes, comely appearance, beautiful face. Just he's got everything going for him physically and spiritually. He's got everything going for him, right? And she coveted his beauty in her heart. Her soul was fixed upon Joseph. She enticed him day after day. So she kept complimenting him, saying how beautiful it is to look at you. Joseph said to her, surely he who created me in my mother's womb created all mankind. So she kept complimenting him. How beautiful they are while we are alive. She said, how beautiful are your eyes. How beautiful and pleasing are your words, she's saying to him. And she even said, how beautiful is the hair of your head. He said to her, he had enough. How long will you speak these words? Cease to utter these words to me, and rise and attend to your domestic affairs. Go and work. Why are you bugging me? There's no one in my house, she tells him. So it says here that in verse 22, she could not bring Joseph to her, neither did he place, key phrase here, his eye upon her. He didn't even look at her, but directed his eyes below to the ground. Now remember that, men. We see a woman, she's already got us. That's the hook, line, and sinker. But if we don't look at her, if we don't make eye contact, if we don't look at her body, if we don't look at her bending over, if we don't look at her, period, there's a way of escape. But once she gets us with the eyes, whoever that temptress is, the woman, Zelica in this case, she will get you, especially an 18-year-old young man, hormones running wild all over the place. He remembered the law of Jehovah: do not commit adultery, do not commit fornication. And in this case, it says, with a woman who is married, a married woman. That's the key, because you cannot commit adultery, technically, with a woman who is single, because she's not married. And neither should the man should be married as well. If the man's married, obviously that's adultery. So it says here, if you will not listen, if you will not do according to my words, Book of Jasher again, I will chastise you with the punishment of death and put an iron yoke upon you. So she even invited women of Egypt, her friends, to visit and look at this beautiful man, basically. So she commanded her maidservants to prepare food for all the women at the banquet. And she gave them knives to peel the lemons to eat them. And they commanded that they would dress Joseph in costly garments, so expensive clothes, and he would appear before them. And he did. All the women looked at him. They couldn't take their eyes off him. They ended up cutting their hands with the knives they had in their hands. And all the lemons that were in their hands were filled with blood. So they continued to look at the beauty of Joseph. They couldn't take their eyes off of him. And the women saw what she did and said, what have you done to us? Or actually, she said that to them. She said, what have you done? I gave you those lemons to eat, and you all cut your hands. And the blood flowed down to their clothes, and they said, this slave in your house has overcome us. We could not turn our eyelids from him on account of his beauty. And they don't blame her. They said, surely this happened to you the moment that you looked at him. You could not contain yourself from him. How then can I refrain? Oh, this is the Zelica saying this now. Look what happened to you. The moment you looked at him, you couldn't contain yourselves from him. How then can I refrain from him when he's constantly in my house? I see him day after day, going in and out of my house. How can I keep from declining or even from perishing on account of this? So she became sick. Her health started to decline. And they told her, okay, you know what? The only way for you to be cured of your sickness is if you have sex with Joseph, basically, is to make love to him, to be romantically involved with Joseph. So there was a day, it says here, Joseph was doing his master's work. Zelica came secretly and fell on him. Joseph rose up against her. He was more powerful than her. He's stronger than her. He brought her to the ground. And Zelica cried, and tears were flowing from her cheeks. She spoke to him in a voice of supplication, bitterness of soul. Verse 42, it says here, have you ever heard, seen, or known of so beautiful a woman as I am, or better than myself, who speaks daily unto you? Fall into a decline of health, through love for you, confer all this honor upon you, and still you will not listen to my voice. And she's saying, well, if anything happens to you, if my master would punish you, just listen to me, and I will tell him not to punish you, basically. She'll protect him. And Joseph answered, saying, refrain from me, leave me alone, and leave this matter to my master. Behold, my master does not know what is in me with this house, just like Genesis says. Basically what Genesis said, how can I do this great evil and sin to Elohim and to your husband? But Zelica would not listen to Joseph, but she continued to entice him. And it says here there was a festival in Egypt. They're having a big celebration, so she wouldn't join. She was, I guess, depressed, so she stayed in the house, but Joseph was also in the house. She rose up and ascended to her temple in the house. She dressed herself in princely garments, means beautiful garments, or royal garments, expensive clothes. She placed upon her head precious stones of onyx stones inlaid with silver and gold, and she beautified her face and skin with all sorts of women's purifying liquids. She perfumed the temple and the house with cassia and frankincense. So basically, she dolled herself up, put on makeup, put on the best perfume, and she saw Joseph coming in from the field. And it came to pass, uh, he saw Zelika do something where she made him pass through a certain area, but he said, nope. He just turned around and said, I'm not going through there. I can see what this is about. But Zelika said, what's wrong, Joseph? Just come, do your work. I'm going to make room for you and just go do your work. So he came back and he went to where he usually works, sat down to do his master's work. And Zelika came to him and stood in front of him in her expensive clothes with her beautiful smell, all dolled up. And it says she took Joseph, held him, basically grabbing him by his clothes, and said to him, as the king lives, if you will not perform my request of having sex with her, you will die. You're going to die today. And she quickly went and stretched forth her other hand, and she was hiding a sword under her clothes, and she put it on Joseph's neck and said, rise and perform my request, basically have sex with me. And if not, if you don't have sex with me, you're going to die. I'll kill you today. Joseph was afraid of her at her doing this thing. A lot of men would reason, hey, you know what? Since you're going to kill me, let's just do this. But no, Joseph wouldn't look at her. It says that he rose up to flee from her, and she grabbed him by the front of his garments. And in the terror of this situation, he fled, and his garment was seized in her hand and was ripped. So you can see from where the garment was torn, and then it goes off to continue in this story. I'm not going to read it word for word, but I'll just basically tell you they had a trial, and they said, okay, let's see if he's guilty or not. Because Joseph ended up going to a certain place, a certain prison, and I'm going to explain why. It's because they had this trial, and they determined, okay, well, if Joseph was fleeing from you, let's see what part of the garment was ripped. If it's the back, that means he was having sex with you, because he would flee, he would grab the back of his clothes. But if it's the front of his clothes, that means you were the one seeking him, basically. So let's look at that. Let me just read that in more detail. Okay, so I found it. It says here in verse 74, if the tear's in the front, then his face must have been opposite to her, and she might have caught hold of him to come to her. Okay. But if not, if it's not from them, not from the front, okay, so they looked at the garment, basically, and they looked at the tear, and it was in front of Joseph, and they knew that she had pressed him, and they said, the judgment of death is not due to the slave, for he has done nothing, but his judgment is that he be placed in the prison on account of the report. Okay. All right, so anyway, it does say here that she grabbed him by the garments. Okay, where did she grab him? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just looking to see where she grabbed. She sees the front of his garments. Okay, right. So she sees the front part of the garment. So the tear's in the front of the garment. So that means she grabbed him. If the garment was torn in the back, that means he was running away from her. Okay, so that's how they found it out. They found out the truth that way. So because he was not guilty, they said, he has done nothing, but the judgment is he be placed in the prison house on account of this report. So they placed him in the prison house, the place where king's prisoners are confined. So Joseph was there for 12 years, it says. So it's important to notice that if he was guilty, because the book of Genesis seems to lean towards Joseph was guilty, although he didn't do it. But Jasher gives us more information. He wasn't guilty, but he still needs to be placed somewhere because I guess those are the Egyptian laws. If he was guilty, he would have been executed. So notice he was not guilty. He was innocent. So they said, well, we can't kill him. We just put him in the prison house for now. And he ended up having favor with uh, the master of the prison. It also says, or the chief. It says that Zelika, the wife of his former master, still visit him in jail. She would visit him and still entice him. So she wanted to have sex even in jail. Well, not in jail, but she said, if you will do me, basically, if you will have sex with me, I'll break you out of this prison, is what she's saying. I'll bring you out of this prison if you just do me. We can still have a relationship, basically. And Joseph said no. And ironically, later on, because Joseph passed this test, we see that Joseph actually marries, ironically, the daughter of this lady. I believe it's the daughter of the Potiphar, who was known as Potiphar, who was the master. So basically, the daughter of this woman is who he ends up marrying and, yes, having sex with. So, he was rewarded with the even younger version of her. So it's an interesting story. I think it's very, very important for young men to look into this example. Not just young men, all men, to look into this example of Joseph, that he resisted temptation. A woman throwing herself at him. He's in the peak of his sexuality at 18 and hormones, and this woman is probably, I'm guessing, probably in her 40s at the peak of her sexuality, 30s, 40s, whatever the ages of women. I think it's 35, 30 something. And she's enticing this young man to have sex with her. She's probably very beautiful, probably like a Kim Kardashian look. And he is also mentioned to be very beautiful. So nowadays people are like, why not just have fun? But she's a married woman. That's adultery. That's punishable by death. So, you know what? Kudos to Joseph. A great example. We should all keep this to heart and remember this. Whenever we get enticed, not just face to face, but even, online digital things we see on the internet, we should keep this in mind and follow the example of Joseph. See, it's not just important to present the differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic, but there's much to gather and to learn and to live from this example of Joseph. What a great example for us to follow. It's not easy, and although we fail sometimes, we have to keep this in mind and remember Joseph, because when we pass those tests, I'm sure Jehovah Elohim will reward us with the desires of our heart, with a wife, with the things that He knows we need. So thank you for your time. Jehovah bless you and make your way prosperous. Till next episode, we'll look at Genesis chapter 40. This is Jack Knight signing off for Secrets Revealed, the Holy Bible.